In a single afternoon, along one gray river in southern Belgium, roughly 30,000 men were killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. 30,000 in about the time it takes to watch this video twice over. The French Fifth Army came to the River Sambre expecting to attack. Within 72 hours it was running for its life, leaving 4,000 of its men in German hands and 35 of its guns abandoned in the mud. And here is the part nobody tells you. The general who lost this battle, the man history called a coward, the man who was sacked in disgrace 11 days later, may have been the one Frenchman who saved his country. Because at the exact moment his soldiers were dying at Charleroi, 3 German armies were closing around him like a fist. To the north, the Second Army. To the east, the Third Army. Somewhere to the west, an entire enemy wing swinging wide to trap him. If that fist had closed, the war might have ended before it truly began. This is the story of the Battle of Charleroi, the forgotten disaster that set up the miracle that came 2 weeks later. How did a defeat this total end up rescuing France? Stay with me. To understand why men were about to die on the Sambre, you have to understand what was happening across the whole of Belgium in the third week of August, 1914. Germany had a plan decades in the making. Send the bulk of the army wheeling through neutral Belgium, sweep down like a giant scythe, pass west of Paris, and crush the French from behind before Russia could even finish mobilizing in the east. Speed was everything. Every day counted. The right wing of the German army had to keep moving. France had a plan too, and it pointed the wrong way. The French High Command was obsessed with attacking east into Alsace and Lorraine, the provinces stolen from them in 1871. The whole French war machine leaned that direction into the enemy, into the guns, into disaster. Those attacks in the south were already bleeding France white. One man saw the danger in the north. General Charles Lanrezac, commander of the French Fifth Army, kept looking at his maps and feeling a cold certainty in his stomach. The Germans were not just coming through Belgium. They were coming through in overwhelming strength, far to the north and west of where the French expected them. His army, on the far left of the French line, was about to be the first to feel it. Lanrezac warned. He argued. He pestered the commander-in-chief, General Joseph Joffre, until Joffre grew tired of him. And finally, grudgingly, Joffre let Lanrezac swing his army north to the line of the river Sambre into the industrial coal country around a smoke-blackened town called Charleroi. What waited for him there was the German Second Army under General Karl von Bülow, and behind it, crossing the Meuse to the east, the German Third Army under General Max von Hausen, 2 armies. 18 divisions, bearing down on a French force that had come to attack and would barely have time to dig in. Picture the ground. The Sambre is not a mighty river. It is a slow, dark, industrial waterway winding through a landscape of coal pits, slag heaps, factory chimneys, and grimy mining villages with names like Tamines, Roseleys, and Asso. Rows of brick miners' houses, canals, bridges every few kilometers. It is close country, broken country, terrible country to defend and worse to attack across. To the east, the Sambre meets a bigger river, the Meuse, at the fortress city of Namur. That corner, the angle where the 2 rivers join, was the hinge of Lanrezac's whole position. Hold the hinge, and the line held. Lose it, and everything folded. On the French side, General Lanrezac spread his Fifth Army across this ground. In the center, in front of Charleroi itself, stood the Third Corps under General Sauret. To their left along the Sambre, the 10th Corps under General Deforges. On the vital right flank, guarding the angle of the rivers by the Meuse, the First Corps under one of the hardest fighting soldiers in the French army, General Louis Franchet d'Esperey, a bull of a man his troops nicknamed Desperate Frankie. Screening the exposed left rode the cavalry of General André Sordet, and on the right, inside the forts of Namur, sat the garrison of General Augustin Michel, roughly 15 French divisions in all. Now the enemy entrance. Marching down onto that river from the north came the German Second Army, hardened, confident, flushed with victory after smashing the Belgian fortress of Liège. At its head, a cautious, methodical, iron-willed commander, General Karl von Bülow. He did not believe in reckless charges, he believed in weight, in artillery, in grinding an enemy down. And swinging in from the east, crossing the Meuse to take the French in the flank, came General Max von Hausen and the Saxons of the German Third Army, 18 German divisions against 15 French. And the Germans had something the French did not, a plan that was already working. Lannesac's orders were to attack across the Sambre. But he hesitated. Every instinct told him this was a trap. His army was strung out, his right flank hung in the air, and the enemy was stronger than anyone above him would admit. He waited, and while he waited, General von Bülow decided the matter for him. The 21st of August, morning. General Joffre sent word confirming what Lannesac already feared. Powerful German columns were pushing west and south. Lannesac studied the line of the Sambre and considered his attack. He considered too long. Because General von Bülow did not wait to be attacked, he attacked without waiting for the full weight of his own army, and even without waiting for Hausen's Third Army to come up on his flank. Bülow ordered his lead corps straight at the river. German infantry came down to the Sambre in the afternoon and threw themselves at the bridges. The French forward troops, thin, unsupported, not yet dug in, fought back among the miners' cottages and the slag heaps. It was close, vicious, confusing, fighting, house to house, street to street, in villages full of terrified civilians. The Germans forced a crossing, then another. By 9 o'clock that first night, German soldiers were across the Sambre at Arsimont, on the southern bank, planting themselves on the wrong side of Lannesac's river. Fighting flared at Tamines, at Roslys, at Azo. French counterattacks went in with the bayonet and in places threw the Germans back toward the water. In other places they simply died in the open, cut down by machine guns and by the German field artillery that Bülow used with such brutal skill. By the end of the first day, the shape of the disaster was already there for anyone who dared to see it. Lannesac had come to the Sambre to attack. Instead, the enemy had attacked him, seized crossings over his river, and lodged themselves on his bank. The initiative was gone, and the 22nd of August would be worse. The 22nd of August. This is the day the trap begins to close. At dawn, General von Bülow pushes hard to widen his bridgeheads south of the Sambre. The French center under General Sauret is now being levered backward, away from the river, back toward Charleroi and the high ground behind it. The German guns are relentless. Every French counterattack meets a wall of shell fire and machine guns, and the gray infantry keeps coming and coming and coming. But the real danger is not in the center, it is on the right. To the east, the Saxons of General Max von Hausen's Third Army arrive on the Meuse. They come down on the river crossings around Dinant and Anseremme, below Namur, and they start forcing their way over. Do you understand what that means? If Hausen gets across the Meuse in strength, he is behind Lannesac's right shoulder. He can roll up the entire French line from the flank, pin the Fifth Army against Bülow's army to the north, and destroy it. There is one man standing in that gap. General Louis Franchet d'Esperey and his First Corps hold the angle of the rivers. And here, on this terrible day, Desperate Frankie earns his name. His men fight like demons along the Meuse, counterattacking again and again, throwing the Saxons back from the crossings, buying hours, buying time, holding the door shut by sheer violence while the rest of the army bleeds. Meanwhile, to the right rear, the fortress of Namur, supposedly a mighty stronghold, the anchor of the whole position, is dying. German and Austrian siege guns, the same monstrous howitzers that shattered Liège, are pounding General Augustin Michel's forts into rubble and dust. The great fortress that was meant to hold for weeks will not hold for days. By the evening of the 22nd, Lannesac stands over his maps and sees the whole terrible picture at last. His center is caving. His fortress is collapsing. And on his right, only the exhausted men of Franchet d'Esperey are keeping 3 German armies from snapping shut around him. He also knows something his soldiers do not. Far to the east, in the forests of the Ardennes, the neighboring French Fourth Army has just been beaten too. There is no help coming. There is no one to his right. The flank is open all the way to Germany. The 23rd of August, the longest, worst day. Follow it hour by hour, because everything now hangs by a thread. The morning opens with the German Second Army pressing forward all along the Sambre. General von Bülow has his bridgeheads, and now he means to break out of them. His artillery opens with a roar that men said they felt in their chests kilometers away. Shell after shell walks across the French positions, and behind the barrage the German infantry rises out of the smoke and comes on in waves. In the center, the French Third Corps and 10th Corps are being hammered off the river line and back into the industrial sprawl. The fighting is a nightmare of close quarters. Men shoot each other across narrow streets. They fight through factory yards and rail sidings and the black skeletons of coal mine winding towers. There is no clean line anymore, no neat front, just a churning belt of villages where French and German soldiers kill each other among the brick and the smoke, and the civilians of Charleroi cower in their cellars while the war rolls over their homes. The lead German assault companies crest a slag heap. Below them, French gunners swing their 75mm field guns around and fire over open sights. The shells tear gaps in the gray ranks. For a moment, the attack staggers. Then the German guns answer, ranging in on the French batteries, and one by one the French pieces are smashed or overrun. Slowly, terribly, the center gives way. Watch the French infantryman in these hours, because his ordeal tells you why the center could not hold. He had been trained for the attack, drilled to charge with the bayonet, dressed still in the blue coat and red trousers of an older war. Against machine guns and modern artillery, that courage was not enough, and he was learning it the hardest way a man can. Officers led their companies forward against the German bridgeheads and were scythed down in rows. Whole battalions were shredded in minutes, crossing open ground that the German gunners had already measured to the meter. And still, in village after village, small knots of Frenchmen fought on among the brick and the rubble, holding a street, a factory wall, a railway embankment, long after any hope of victory had drained away. By the middle of the day, the center is no longer a line at all. It is a slow, grinding, backward brawl through the outskirts of Charleroi, French and German soldiers so tangled together that the artillery of both sides cannot always fire for fear of hitting their own. Smoke from burning houses rolls across the battlefield. The noise is beyond anything these men have ever known, the crash of the guns, the tearing rip of the machine guns, the shouts and screams swallowed in the din. General Sauret's Third Corps and General Deforge's 10th Corps are being pushed back, step by bloody step, and there is nothing left to plug the gaps. But the killer blow is coming from the east. On this morning, General Max von Hausen throws the full weight of the Third Army across the Meuse. The Saxons force the river crossings below Namur and drive straight at the right flank of General Franchet d'Esperey's First Corps. This is the moment the whole battle has been building toward. If the First Corps breaks, the road behind the entire Fifth Army lies open, and every French soldier on the Sambre is trapped. Franchet d'Esperey does not break. He does something almost unthinkable. On a day of collapse, he attacks. He gathers what he can and hurls his First Corps at the advancing Saxons in a furious counterstroke along the Meuse, buying yet more precious time, keeping the door jammed shut with the bodies of his own men. But even desperate Frankie cannot hold forever against a whole fresh army pouring across the river. Ground is given. The flank bends back. The pressure becomes unbearable. And then, to the right rear, the news that ends all argument. The fortress of Namur is finished. General Augustin Michel's forts, pounded to ruins by the great siege howitzers, can no longer hold. The garrison begins to abandon the position. The hinge of Lanrezac's whole line, the anchor point on which everything depended, is gone. With Namur falling, the gap between the Fifth Army and the shattered Fourth Army to the east yawns wide open. Through that gap, if he chooses, General von Hausen can pour and swing behind Lanrezac's entire army. Now put yourself inside the mind of General Charles Lanrezac on the evening of the 23rd of August. His center is broken. His fortress has fallen. His right flank is bending under the blows of a fresh German army. His neighbor to the east has been beaten and is retreating. To the far west, he has learned that yet another German army, the First, under a commander driving hard around his open flank, is swinging wide to get behind him and complete the encirclement. 3 German armies, closing. And his own high command, back at headquarters, is still sending him orders to attack. Attack? With what? With a broken center, a collapsing flank, and no fortress at his back? To obey would be to feed the entire Fifth Army into the closing jaws and lose it forever. And if the Fifth Army is destroyed here on the Sambre, the whole left of the French line ceases to exist, and the road to Paris lies open. This is not a battle Lanrezac can win. The only question left is whether he can save his army to fight another day. At 11 o'clock at night on the 23rd of August, General Charles Lanrezac makes the hardest decision of his life. Without waiting for permission from above, on his own authority, he orders the entire Fifth Army to break contact and retreat, fall back, get out of the trap, save the men. It is an order that will destroy his career and brand him a coward for the rest of his days. It is also, quite possibly, the order that saves France, because a general who attacks on the 23rd of August loses his army. A general who retreats keeps it alive, keeps it in the field, keeps it ready for a river called the Marne 2 weeks in the future. In the darkness, the columns of the Fifth Army turn their backs on the Sambre and begin to march south, out of the closing jaws, carrying their wounded and their guns and their exhaustion with them. The Battle of Charleroi is lost. The army is saved. Think about the weight of that choice for a single human being. Every order coming down from above screams at him to hold, to counterattack, to redeem the day with French blood and French courage. Every rule of the pride of his profession tells him that a general does not run. And yet the maps do not lie, and Charles Lanrezac can read a map better than any man in that headquarters. He can see the 3 gray arrows curling around his army, and he alone is willing to be called a coward rather than lead 100,000 of his countrymen into a killing pocket. So he gives the order that no one will thank him for, and the tired columns melt away into the night, and the German gunners wake the next morning to find the enemy gone. Let the guns fall silent for a moment, and look at what this river cost. In 3 days of fighting, the French Fifth Army lost somewhere between 10,000 and 14,000 men killed, wounded, or captured. 4,000 French soldiers were marched away into captivity. 35 guns were left behind. On the German side, General von Bülow's Second Army lost around 11,000 of its own, and the Saxons of the Third Army left thousands more dead and wounded on the banks of the Meuse. 25,000 young men, at the very least, torn apart along a few kilometers of grimy coal country river in 72 hours. But the soldiers were not the only ones who suffered here, and this is the part of Charleroi that history must never look away from. As the German armies stormed across these rivers, a dark terror moved with them. Convinced that Belgian civilians were firing on their troops, German soldiers turned on the towns. In the village of Tamins, on the Sambre, hundreds of civilians, men, women, and children were rounded up and shot down or bayoneted against the wall of the village square and along the riverbank. Close to 400 innocents died in Tamins alone. Days later, in the town of Dinant on the Meuse, where the Saxons had crossed, the horror was worse still. Hundreds more civilians, whole families, lined up and killed in the streets. The dead of Dinant numbered in the hundreds, one of the worst massacres of the entire opening campaign. So when you picture Charleroi, do not only picture soldiers, picture a mining town on fire. Picture a family dragged from a cellar. Picture the smoke of burning villages hanging over the Sambre while the exhausted columns of the Fifth Army trudge south into the night. This is the true face of the battle, not a line on a map, but a country set alight in the first terrible weeks of a war that everyone had promised would be over by Christmas. And through all of it, the ordinary French infantryman marched. He had been told he was going forward to attack, to liberate, to win. Instead, he had been shelled, outnumbered, and beaten back, and now he was walking south, day after day, in the summer heat, boots falling apart, not understanding why he was retreating when he had not truly been broken in the field. He did not know it yet, but every step south was a step toward salvation. The Battle of Charleroi was, on paper, a clear German victory. General von Bülow had forced the Sambre, taken the crossings, captured thousands of prisoners and dozens of guns, and driven the French Fifth Army from the field. The great German wheel through Belgium rolled on. Namur fell completely within days. To the west, the small British army fighting alongside Lanrezac was forced back from the town of Mons at almost the same moment, dragged into retreat by the collapse of the French line beside it. And yet, look closer at what Bülow actually achieved, and what he did not. He had won the ground. He had not won the prize. The whole purpose of the German plan was not to push the French back, it was to surround them, to trap the French armies against their own borders and annihilate them before they could recover. That was the envelopment the German plan demanded. And Lanrezac, by refusing to stand and fight to the last man, by retreating on his own authority on the night of the 23rd, had slipped his entire army out of the trap before it closed. The prize walked away in the dark. For this, General Charles Lanrezac was not thanked. He was condemned. In the eyes of the High Command, and of a commander-in-chief who wanted attackers and not doubters, Lanrezac had been too cautious, too pessimistic, too quick to give ground. On the 3rd of September, less than 2 weeks after Charleroi, General Joseph Joffre relieved him of command and sent him home. In his place, to lead the Fifth Army, Joffre appointed the one man who had truly shone on the Sambre General Louis Franchet d'Espery, desperate Frankie himself. Lanrezac left under a cloud that would follow him for years. The coward of Charleroi, some called him, the general who ran. But the army he had saved was still whole, still armed, still marching. And it was about to matter more than anyone could imagine. Here is why Charleroi is one of the most important defeats in the history of France. 2 weeks after Lanrezac ordered his retreat, the German armies that had chased him south finally came within sight of Paris. They were tired now. Their supply lines were stretched to breaking. Their men had marched hundreds of kilometers in the August heat. And crucially, the French armies they had been trying to destroy since the border battles were still there, battered, but intact, still in the field, still able to fight. Above all, the French Fifth Army, the very army that had escaped the trap at Charleroi, was still a living, breathing force. In early September, on the river Marne just east of Paris, the French turned and struck back. And in that counterstroke, the battle the world would remember as the miracle of the Marne, the Fifth Army played a central part. The very same corps that had bled on the Sambre, now under the command of Franchet d'Espery, drove into the flank of General von Bülow's Second Army, the same enemy they had faced at Charleroi. The German advance was stopped. The great wheel toward Paris was broken. The war of movement was over, and the long agony of the trenches began. None of that could have happened if the Fifth Army had been destroyed on the Sambre. If Lanrezac had obeyed the order to attack on the 23rd of August, if he had stood and let 3 German armies close around him, there would have been no Fifth Army left to fight at the Marne. The hole in the French line would have been catastrophic. Paris might well have fallen. So the defeat at Charleroi was the price of the victory at the Marne. The retreat that shamed Lanrezac was the retreat that kept France in the war. Sometimes the most important thing a general can do is refuse to lose everything at once. So where does Charleroi stand among the great battles of the First World War? It does not have the mythic name of Verdun, where France bled for 10 months and swore that they shall not pass. It does not have the grim scale of the Somme, where 20,000 British soldiers died on a single morning. It does not have the shattering finality of Tannenberg in the east, where an entire Russian army was swallowed whole. Give those battles their due. They are rightly remembered as monsters of the war. But Charleroi belongs in a different and quieter category, the battles that were lost and yet decided everything. It was a defeat, plainly. The Germans held the field, yet it was the defeat that made the decisive victory possible. Among the battles of the opening weeks of the war, in that furious clash along the frontiers where the whole future of the conflict hung in the balance, Charleroi may be the most consequential of them all, not because of who won it, but because of what the loser managed to carry away. History loves the general who attacks and wins. It is far harder to honor the general who retreats and, by retreating, wins the war 2 weeks later for someone else to finish. Charles Lanrezac lost his battle, lost his command, and very nearly lost his good name, but he kept his army, and that army saved France. Weigh it honestly, and the disgraced pessimist of Charleroi looks less like a coward and more like the coldest, clearest head in the French High Command in the most dangerous August his country ever knew. That is where Charleroi ranks not as one of the war's great triumphs, but as one of its great hinges, the battle France had to lose so that France could survive to win. A river runs black through the coal country of southern Belgium, and a man walks away from it into ruin so that his army might live, and 2 weeks later, on another river, that army turns and saves a nation. If you want to see how the retreat from the Sambre became the counterattack that stopped Germany cold at the gates of Paris, watch our deep dive on the miracle of the Marne next. Until then, keep your eyes on the quiet ones in history, the ones who lost the battle and saved everything else.